Welcome everyone to tonight's Marine Conservation League After Hours presentation titled Eel River Dams, Challenges and Opportunities. I'm Kate Powers. I'm tonight's MC. I've been a board member of MCL for 10 years, and I currently serve as co-chair of MCL's Transportation, Land Use, and Water Committee with Paul Jensen. I'm joined tonight behind the scenes by Martha Richter-Smith, MCL's office administrator, and our producer of MCL's After Hours. And we are fortunate to have our guest, Charlie Schneider of Trout, with us, and he will be sharing his knowledge and expertise on tonight's topic. But first, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Marine Conservation League, commonly known as MCL, we are a nonprofit Marin-based environmental organization that was established in 1934. Yes, we are celebrating our 90th year. So MCL's mission is to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of Marin in a changing environment. To do that, we monitor a broad range of land use and planning decisions countywide to try to ensure that Marin's ecological values are maintained and restored. In addition to our Land Use, Transportation, and Water Committee, MCL has a Parks and Open Space Committee that tracks issues and advocates on policy and management of Marin's public lands. And MCL's Climate Action Working Group, which is a highly committed group of advocates who study and promote opportunities for local decarbonization, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and mitigation of the causes of climate change. Before we get to the presentation, a few housekeeping notes. Tonight's presentation will be a webinar and it's scheduled for an hour. During that time, we request that you remain muted. After the presentation by Charlie, there will be time for what we hope will be a robust question and answer period. We hope that you will participate in this portion of the evening because it will give us all an opportunity to delve deeper into the interesting details on this topic. We ask that you please put your questions in the chat function. We will start the Q&A period by reading and addressing the questions in chat. And if there's time, and only if there's time, we will take a few questions by raised hands at the end. So now on to the presentation. Tonight's topic will address the challenges and opportunities surrounding PG&E's application to surrender their Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, license to own and operate the Potter Valley project on the Eel River, east of Ukiah. With the decommissioning of the 100-year-old hydropower facilities, 2 dams on the Eel River are also planned for removal. Charlie will discuss the project's impacts on Eel River fisheries, the opportunity to recover those fisheries and support tribal justice with dam removals, and the impacts to water users in the Russian River Basin that have grown to rely on the diversion of the free abandoned water from the hydropower plant. 19 customers currently contract with Sonoma Water for water from the Russian River Basin, including transfers from the Eel. 2 of those customers are Marin Municipal Water District and North Marin Water District. Both Marin agencies support continuing diversion from the Eel after decommissioning occurs. California's landscape has been shaped by water. It has also been shaped by efforts to control and manipulate it for human use. Efforts that include the building of dams, flooding of valleys and low-lying areas, creation of reservoirs, and the drilling of tunnels. The removal of old and failing dams offers an opportunity to revalue water left in river systems, and it's important to the health and survival of river and forest ecosystems and species, as well as to reassess ways to more equitably and sustainably quench what Norris Hundley has termed the Great Thirst, especially as we increasingly experience the effects of climate change. Before I introduce Charlie, I'd like to acknowledge Susan Stomp. Board members from MCL have been following water issues in Marin, Sonoma, and the Delta for decades. And as a 40-year MCL board member, past president, and longtime Land Use, Transportation, and Water Committee Chair and North Marin Unit Chair, Susan has been following the issues of North Marin water, Sonoma water, and the Eel River, and she has brought them to the fore to MCL. Susan recently retired from the board, but she continues to follow water and North Marin issues for MCL. And she is the one who reached out to Charlie and asked him to make this presentation to MCL. And for that, Susan, we thank you. And now for a brief intro to Charlie Schneider. Charlie was raised by loggers in the forests of Northern California. He holds a Master of Natural Resources degree from Oregon State University, and a graduate certificate in fisheries management. Charlie leads Trout's efforts to remove the 2 dams in the Eel River and is part of Trout's policy team. Charlie will give us more information about his background and his work with Trout in his presentation. He lives in Petaluma with his wife and 2 sons. Charlie, welcome to MCL's After Hours. And while you open your slides, I just want to encourage everyone to please put your questions in chat as we proceed. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the intro and appreciate y'all having me. Yeah, this is a presentation I've given to a few groups, and I'm fortunate to have sort of plugged in on the Potter Valley project a number of years ago when I was in grad school, and really got interested in it just because it's a big, important natural resource issue in our region. And I felt like a lot of people weren't really aware of it. And as someone that's sort of paid a lot of attention, as a fish nerd and someone that's paid a lot of attention to dam removals across the US, really looked at this as an opportunity, sort of for the next Klamath in our region. And of course it's complicated, like all dam removal. So I hope I can share some of that complexity with you all tonight. I hope you'll think deeply about these big, important resource issues that we all, deal with daily. I think a lot of people just turn on the tap and water comes out, but these are important decisions. And I hope, this can be a discussion too. I'm going to try to zip through these slides in 20-25 minutes and leave a lot of time for Q&A because this is a complicated project. And I'll do my best to answer all the questions I can on it. And hopefully speak to your interests as well as they relate to this. So yeah, I live in Petaluma. Kate touched on my background, but grew up on the North Coast in Fort Bragg. I've always been a river lover and into steelhead fishing and really just being outside. And that led me to Sonoma State, to Santa Rosa JC originally, and then Sonoma State, and then eventually Oregon State to get a master's degree in natural resources management, which sounds very broad, but I really focused heavily on fisheries and water. And part of why I did that is just because everything flows downhill, and I just saw salmon not only as something I care a lot about growing up in a fishing community, but really also as sort of a bellwether for environmental health and a useful tool if you want to try to get a sense of the health of the ecosystem and really recover that ecosystem as well, right? I like to think salmon are charismatic megafauna. They have a romantic story. It's hard not to be romantic about them. And certainly, again, growing up on the North Coast, knowing salmon fishermen, people lost at sea, people that spent their entire lives, chasing these fish. It's certainly part of the culture of the North Coast and the culture of coastal California. In a way, I think that people forget, California is the Pacific Northwest, right? We have these iconic species, and just because folks aren't often out there, as often out there seeing them and interacting with them as they are further north, I think it can be lost on a lot of Californians that this is salmon country. So a few years ago, I was fortunate enough, I think because of my volunteer involvement in this project, originally as a member of the local Trout Unlimited chapter up here in Well, y'all have your own TU chapter in Marin that goes down to the city, and once we get to Sonoma County, it goes all the way up to Humboldt. So the Red Empire chapter of Trout Unlimited. So really, as a volunteer, when I was in grad school, and crazy to say, had more free time, just looking for ways to get involved with fisheries restoration as a student, and really plugged into this project. And I think I just wouldn't leave so much that someone had to hire me. Like I eventually knew too much. So I was hired on by Cal Trout as Lost Coast project manager, which is a title we just made up. But really, I wear many hats. One of them is sort of our lead on Potter Valley project and Eel River Dams issue. But I also work statewide with our legal and policy team on a myriad of issues, funding for restoration, you know, legislation, and a number of other things. So I'm a bit of a unique, I have a bit of a unique job because I do kind of, I think my background is more in fisheries biology, and I'm sort of the biologist in the room, often with a lot of lawyers. So I try to wear a lot of hats, and that broad education I think has served me well. Cal Trout is a statewide restoration and conservation organization. We've been around for about 50 years. We've got 7 regional offices in the state. I work from my house, doesn't count as an office here in Petaluma, but we're all over the state. We've got about 50 staff. And interestingly, Cal Trout really got its start in the Eel River with the Dos Rios Dam proposal back in the 70s. And that effort to stop that dam from being built and flooding Round Valley and Covelo really is what got a number of our founders sort of engaged in this advocacy work, and really interested in doing this work statewide once that effort was over. And so, yeah, the Eel River's been part of certainly my upbringing, Cal Trout's upbringing, and it's just a big special watershed on the North Coast. It's about 3,500 square miles. It's this weird watershed that breaks people's brain because it flows from south to north. And it's got these 4 main forks. The Van Duzen, sort of up near Fortuna, the South Fork, which is what runs up Highway 101. So most people think the South Fork is the main stem eel. The North Fork, which is out in the middle of nowhere. The Middle Fork, which wraps around Covelo. And then this, the main stem, the upper main stem, which is where the dams are located. And it's this really interesting, diverse watershed. It's one of the most erosive watersheds in California. And I like to think of it as it's really this big, mean, young watershed where the hills were uplifted recently and the river is actively cutting back down through them. You add on that flashy geology or flashy hydrology. So big winter storms come in and just dump a ton of water in the headwaters, and it really just moves rock and sediment around. And so it really gives you these dramatic landscapes, unlike, maybe any other river compared to maybe the Smith, further north. So it's this really unique watershed, and it's very large. It's the 3rd largest river entirely in California. So just behind the Klamath and the Sacramento San Joaquin system. And historically, that size and that diversity made it one of the largest salmon producing rivers in the state. Peter Moyle, the fisheries biologist, or now retired fisheries biologist from UC Davis, kind of, one of the preeminent thinkers on fish in California. And one of his colleagues did some historic rebuilding of population numbers using cannery records. So when the gold rush, canneries came, right, to feed the miners. They originally set up shop in the Sac and San Joaquin. And when they fished out those rivers, they kind of marched north, and the eel is one of the places they stop. And you can see that top picture, what that looked like, gill nets across the river, catching as many fish as they could. But looking at those cannery records, up to 1 million fish in good years is what they estimated, and maybe half as many, so 500,000 fish in normal years. And of those, 800,000 of them are thought to be Chinook. So that's a massive Chinook run in this river. And of course, the eel is sort of a shadow of its former self, and certainly the dams aren't the only cause of that, but populations now are somewhere around 1%. Moyle estimated at 1 to 5%, but we have better information now. I think it points it closer to 1%. And like many California rivers, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's road building, it's logging, it's cannabis, it's historic overharvest. And it's also invasive species in the Eel River in the form of pike minnow. But that abundance, that historic abundance, to me speaks of opportunity, right? This is still a basin that's relatively undeveloped. Much of the land is in public hands still. Much of the land that's not is in large private ownerships, which just makes it easier to do restoration work and conservation in my mind anyway. And then of course we have much stronger environmental regulations now as they relate to logging and cannabis as well. In terms of the dams specifically, almost all the land above the dams is in Mendocino National Forest, so it's well protective, and a decent chunk of that is in wilderness. There's no hatcheries in the basin, and there hasn't been for about 20 years, and so the genetics are strong wild genetics that are going to make these fish more resilient to climate change. And we know that resident trout above the dams still hold the genes for anadromy. So anadromy meaning the ability to migrate to salt water. And so some new genetic research has come out, suggesting that if the dams came out, those fish could start their migratory lifestyle. And if nothing else, they're the descendants of migratory steelhead, which is pretty darn neat. And one thing that gives me a lot of hope is just that, we could be reconnecting what would be the longest free-flowing river entirely in California. Of course, the Klamath, dams are out now, but that river goes up into Oregon, and there are still dams above the 4 that were just recently removed. And we're heavily invested there. We just released this phase 1 of this pretty big initiative Caltrout's undertaking, this restoration and conservation plan for the Eel River. And we're seeking funding for phase 2, and I think likely to get it. But we're really taking this basin-wide ridgetops to estuaries approach in the Eel River. And it's really ambitious because, again, it's a 3,500 square mile watershed, right? So it's big. And we really think, and our scientists think, and our project managers think, and the folks we work with think, this is the place where we can have, sustainable salmon runs in California. And we're investing heavily to try to make that a reality. And this slide is very busy, so don't feel like you need to read anything, but I put this in here, and I pulled it from another presentation I've done simply to say, in Caltrout's mind, I think it's fair to say in a resource agency's mind, in many Eel River advocates and scientists' mind, the dams are worth removing because the habitat above them is good, and it offers an opportunity for salmon recovery. So it's got cold water. We've done the science and research and ground truthing to suggest that if we did take the dams out, it would have a positive impact on salmon populations. This quote is from a NOAA fisheries paper, basically saying that relative to the rest of the watershed, this is really good habitat, and reconnecting it would be valuable. To put that watershed in context, I think it's really tough when you see it on a map to say, like, how much area are we talking about, because it is the headwaters. But the watershed behind Scott Dam is roughly 300 square miles. And so if any of you have been up to the Gualala River, that's a watershed of similar size. So it's a pretty significant sized watershed. It's the size of I would say like a medium size to medium large size coastal watershed. I mean, Gualala is a decent sized watershed, or Redwood Creek that runs through Redwood National Park. So those are kind of the analogous watershed sizes. So it's a big chunk of land behind the dams. And so just to orient you, here's a map of the 2 watersheds and kind of how they're connected. And there's a neat piece of geography here where the powerhouse is, right at the head of Potter Valley, where the eel runs within a mile of the headwaters of the Russian River. And I want to say it's about an 800-foot drop from the eel down to the Russian. And so the enterprising folks back in the early 1900s saw that and thought, oh, hey, we could pop a pipe through the mountain here, and that would give us the head we need to generate hydroelectricity. And that's really what was the impetus for building the Potter Valley project. So the project itself, and I'll just call it the project from now on. It's the words I tend to choose. But Cape Horn Dam was built first. It's the smaller of the two dams, and it was built in 1908. And it's really just a diversion dam. It basically just backs up the water enough to push it into the pipe that goes through the mountain, as I described, to the powerhouse. And the powerhouse itself is located in Potter Valley. Neither dam has turbines on it. It's just that powerhouse in Potter Valley where the electricity was generated. A number of years later, Scott Dam was built upstream, and that dam is really just designed to be a storage dam. So to store that winter water for summer use, so they could generate electricity year round. And that's what creates Lake Pillsbury. So Cape Horn Dam, has a very small reservoir associated with it. It's basically full of sediment at this point. And again, really is just there to back up the water. There's no fish ladder on Scott Dam. There is one on Cape Horn Dam. Doesn't work great. Gets clogged up with sediment pretty frequently. And fish numbers between the two dams haven't been great over the last 30 years. So that tunnel, portions of it are made of old growth redwood, which is kind of neat, like an old wood stave redwood tank. And I'll have another slide in the future that talks coming up, talks a little bit about those water volumes, historic and current. But right now it diverts probably in the neighborhood of 30,000 acre feet. And that's dropped significantly over the last several years. Also importantly, we know the project's been a money loser for PG&E, which is why they're deciding to get rid of it. And the transformer failed in the powerhouse back in 2021. PG&E's not fixed it because they don't want the project anymore. So this truly is a obsolete hydroelectric project. It doesn't generate electricity. So what comes next? PG&E has said the project's uneconomical, and they've decided not to relicense it. Kate mentioned FERC. FERC's the federal agency that regulates hydropower dams. So any large hydropower project, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has to have a FERC license to operate it. And those licenses typically run from 30 to 50 years. The license for this project expired in 2022. And so PG&E was considering relicensing the project, so keeping it. And in 2019, they decided, man, it's a bad idea. We lose too much money on this. We have concerns about if it's of value to our ratepayers for the next 50 years, and sought to offload the project. So first they sought to sell it. No one stepped forward. And then FERC has what's called an orphan project effort, where essentially they try to find folks to take over the project license from the licensee. And the Two Basin Solution Partnership, which you may have heard of, made an effort to take over that license. That effort ultimately wasn't successful, but it did generate a number of studies that I'll kind of touch on later. So it was a useful exercise, but ultimately that license expired with no new applicant, and PG&E has since submitted a schedule to develop a decommissioning plan, which would cede them their license to operate the project. Annulled, they wouldn't have a license to operate it. They will have to remove facilities or, in other ways make the project safe to FERC's satisfaction. And then they will no longer operate the project as a FERC licensed project. So that plan, that draft plan that PG&E will submit to FERC is due in January of next year. It will have a 30-day public comment period, and then final plan will be due in July of next year. From there, there will be NEPA, there will be CEQA, there'll be a number of permitting processes that still continue, but that's really the first time PG&E will put down on paper in front of FERC what they plan to do with these facilities. So along those lines, PG&E has told the public and stakeholders what they plan to do with those facilities. And there was a number of meetings last week where they shared this information with agencies. But their plan right now, and unlikely to change, is to remove all the facilities that would back up water in the river. They have a more fancy way of saying that, but we're basically talking about removal of both dams. In large part due to ESA obligations and the need to maintain any infrastructure in perpetuity. So PG&E doesn't want to maintain any project works. They don't want to maintain any project lands. It's not in ratepayers' interest to have to maintain non-generating infrastructure into the future. So their plans for full facilities removal, but they do plan to include what's called the non-project use of project lands to allow for the construction of a new diversion in the project footprint by the Eel Russian Project Authority, or ERPA. And this effort has been something that Caltrout's been a member of the steering committee on, that's been formed to work with PG&E on it, to really try to seek a regional solution to this issue of the PG&E giving up their license for this project. And I think importantly for us, one of our big concerns is potential delay for dam removal. Fish populations in the eel are not doing well. We don't want to see this project linger. It's important to get these dams out ASAP. And so, one of the agreements with this groups is that this effort to potentially maintain a diversion won't delay dam removal. That's really important for PG&E as well. They don't want to be liable for these facilities, and they don't want their ratepayers to be liable for these facilities for any longer than necessary. And so the plan right now is to really do this through two different permitting pathways. So dam removal would be one effort overseen by FERC, and then the building and eventual maintenance and operations of the diversion structure would be a separate thing. So essentially what PG&E will do is ask FERC, we want to take these lands and facilities out of our license and transfer them to this other entity, and then they'll be responsible for everything from there on out. So this is just a bit of a timeline I pulled from PG&E, and really just takes us up to the next year. And so this is, PG&E has already shared an initial draft of their surrender application. They've allowed for comments and input, and they'll be doing another round of that as they continue to develop their license surrender application, eventually ending eventually in their submittal to FERC. So what's the plan? Well, it's removal of Scott Dam, as I said, and site restoration. It's all the plans are very high level. We don't have the details yet. Removal of Cape Horn Dam, so both dams are out. The restoration of the inundation zone, so replanting, sediment management, et PG&E manages a number of recreational facilities, and as of now, their plan is to decommission those, although I think a number of us are interested in maintaining those, figuring out how to maintain those rec sites, to help support the recreational economy and folks that like to use the area. They do plan to leave some access roads and facilities in place, but by and large, what FERC will require them to do is make the project safe into the future. So they'll have a discussion with FERC on what that looks like, and agencies as well, and develop that plan to basically put these lands back close to what they were prior to the project. So shifting gears a little bit, I mentioned those water supply numbers, and I think one important thing to know, in addition to the facility no longer making electricity and not being of value to PG&E and its ratepayers, are the impacts to the water supply. And so, water kind of comes through the project, comes to the Russian side from the eel side in two different ways. One is through hydropower generation. That's obviously stopped. But when they were generating electricity, they were doing it in the winter time when flows were high in the eel, and then less so in the summer when water was less available in the eel. It also comes through in the form of the biological opinion, which are federal regulations for environmental protection. And so a certain amount of water has to be transferred through the project to keep the East Branch Russian River wet, and protect resources there. And those are just rules that were put in place with the previous relicensing to maintain the environment as part of the project. It's pretty typical stuff with dams. But as the project's kind of fallen apart over the last several years, a number of things have changed that Lake Pillsbury's ability to store water and PG&E's ability to move water to the Russian Basin. And it's really been tapered down from about 150,000 acre feet pre-2006, which was before the previous license conditions went into effect, And that previous license wasn't very friendly to the Eel River downstream of Cape Horn Dam. It sent a significant amount of the upper Eel water to the Russian, and really didn't do much for the upper Eel River. And with that previous license change, conditions were put in place to try to help keep cold water coming out of Lake Pillsbury to protect the limited fish resources, basically between the two dams before the water got too warm. For salmon and for steelhead, particularly, who need to spend their first summer or first few summers in fresh water, they really need cool water habitat to survive. Those cool waters are found in the headwater, the small tributary headwater streams above Lake Pillsbury, and not really in the main stem eel. And so in order to protect cold water coming out of Lake Pillsbury, to try to sort of mitigate for that blocked habitat, they really changed sort of project operations to try to help maintain those cool waters. And then again, in 2021, a couple of different things happened. The powerhouse failed, and then PG&E also has concerns about sediment sloughing. So when the reservoir gets too low, they're concerned that sediments at the bottom of the lake could slide down and block the low-level outlet. And then just last year, PG&E got some new seismic safety information, and as a result of that, they've made the decision not to allow the reservoir to fill all the way. So it's about a 25% reduction in overall storage volume. And again, this is because seismic concerns at Scott Dam, and they've since, I think, made pretty clear publicly that those seismic concerns are also why they're interested in offloading the project. It would be astronomically expensive for them to repair Scott Dam, and so, that's part of their calculus in cutting their losses. And I'll just say on the water supply impact side, the timing of that water delivery is really important because there's nowhere to store it on the Russian side. It would go into Lake Mendocino, and Lake Mendocino, even with FIRO operations, is only about 110,000 acre feet at best in the spring when the flood control pool is high. So the simple way to think about that is they need to leave space in Lake Mendocino for big storms to come through all winter long. And because of that, they can't really store, when the eel is flowing high and there's a bunch of excess water, they could move over. It doesn't do a lot of good because they just have to pass it through Lake Mendocino and down the Russian River. So just for comparison, Lake Mendocino is about 110,000 acre feet. Lake Sonoma is about 250,000 acre feet. And Lake Pillsbury right now, with all the reductions, is about 45,000. So you can kind of see like the scale of the different reservoirs. And so on the water supply side for Sonoma Water contractors, really the way you can think about the river, and this is a slide from ERPA, the Eel Russian Project Authority, is really breaking the Russian River up into two reaches, the upper river and the lower river. And you can really think about it in three, because Potter Valley Irrigation District here in Potter Valley, really their only water supply, other than natural rainfall. Sorry, I jumped slides. Comes through the powerhouse, right? So in terms of water supply impacts, where Sonoma Water gets its water is from the Mirabel Dam collector facilities, the rainy wells here. And so this is additionally downstream of Lake Sonoma, right? So depending on in-stream flow needs in the Russian River, previous rainfall, dry creek needs, much of the storage for Sonoma Water is really in Lake Sonoma. But certainly there's communities upstream of Dry Creek, Geyserville, Cloverdale, Hopland, that are much more reliant on Lake Mendocino, and that, potentially that additional water that would be put in Lake Mendocino from the Potter Valley project. So big questions moving forward. PG&E is the sole owner of this project. They also own all the water rights associated with the project. So no one in the Russian River side has a water right to Eel River water except for PG&E. So someone has to own and operate a new diversion structure if they want this water to continue. And I think that really leads to, equity and sort of cost balancing questions of, who gets what and how much, who's going to pay for that water, who's going to get it, how much of it. who is responsible for in-stream flow obligations in the Russian? You know, if there isn't enough water in Lake Mendocino, as we've seen in previous drought years, even with the Potter Valley project, there can be curtailments. And that, you know, those water rights in the Russian River are complicated. And then I think, you know, for Eel River advocates and fisheries advocates, you know, we're concerned certainly about the fishery in both rivers, but if we are going to maintain a diversion, how do we do that in a way that's responsible to the health of the Eel River? Because, you know, both sides are really seeking certainty here, and we want a solution that's going to be durable. So this idea of a two-basin solution was proposed, you know, several years ago by Congressman Huffman, and it's really just this idea of like, how can we try to keep as many people whole, as many interests whole as we decommission this project? And you know, a lot of thinking has gone into this over the years, and you know, I think this diagram lays it out pretty well at this point. It's, you know, I've got question marks here, and we'll touch on these question marks. So current project decommission, we know now PG&E will tear everything out. If no one wants to take over the facilities, PG&E is going to take out both dams. They'll turn off the diversion. They'll remove their facilities, pack their bags, and honestly probably sell the lands because they don't need them anymore. It has no value to them. The two basin solution is this idea of how can we, you know, try to keep the Eel River as whole as possible. Really, the plan here is to divert winter water. And this question mark around the powerhouse has been resolved. There will be no power generation with a future project. So right now the proposal is to build a pump station. So Sonoma Water received some DWR funding to go to 30% design. And really efforts by that two basin solution partnership, Congressman Huffman's ad hoc, and other efforts have helped model the water supply piece to suggest that it would be feasible to move winter water over to the Russian River when it's abundant, stored in Lake Mendocino for future use. Again, this sort of, I don't want to say ignores the needs of Potter Valley, but it's sort of the, you know, those needs will need to be dealt with in other ways that are currently being thought about. And then Sonoma Water was recently awarded additional funding to bring this design up to 60%. I was a member of the TAC that sort of assessed these physical solutions along with members of agencies and Sonoma Water and others to really try to design a diversion structure that would be that wouldn't impede the recovery of Eel River fisheries. And so the idea here is, you know, a run of the river diversion. So divert water when it's abundant, don't divert it when it's not abundant, build the physical structure so it's not harmful for fish. And while we have the physical structure, you know, to 30% design, going to 60%, the rate and timing of the diversion is still something that's under negotiation and will need permitting. So we're sort of, I'd say, early days in you know, the details of this. And so here are a couple renderings of what that would look like. So Scott Dam, this is Cape Horn Dam. Scott Dam further upstream is long gone at this point. Maybe not this point. This is current condition, so it could still be up there. This is Cape Horn Dam. Upstream of it, can you guys see my cursor, my arrow, or no?
We can.
Okay, cool. So this is the diversion structure. So the diversion structure is not actually on the dam. As I mentioned, the dam just backs the water up. And the pipe's right here. So these are fish screens. So this is the current configuration, and this is what it would look like with the pump station. And so you can still see that you see here the portion of the dam is maintained, but by and large, it's a free-flowing river through this reach. This river right side crib wall is still TBD. These are just renderings, so you know, conceptual, lots more work to do. You can see in these renderings, the fish ladder is just filled with concrete. You know, we don't really know what's going to happen with these buildings, but the idea is to give you something to orient. So the dam goes away. I'll just flip back and forth here. The pumps themselves are located next to this wall. And in the next slide, I'll switch to another view. But, you know, the idea is a free-flowing river through here, and then a pump station that would move water into the tunnel. You know, I think it's about 25 feet uphill into the tunnel, right? Because when the dam drops down, the river level drops down, and you have to make up for that. And so here's what it looks like dewatered. You can see these remnants of the old dam and fish exclusion barrier here. This would likely get filled with sediment, but there will still be, and this is tough to know because there's bedrock under the dam. So again, all conceptual. This is a trash rack to make sure logs and stuff don't take out the screens. And then here are the fish screens. So water would pass through these screens into a gallery, and then there's pumps located in this building that would pump that water back up. So that's the current physical solution that's being further developed with additional engineering. And, as of the information we have now, it's, thought to be the best option to try to meet this two-basin solution goal. Last slide, I promise. And I always like to end on this slide because this is Gravelly Valley, aka Lake Pillsbury, free Scott Dam. So this is really, what I hope as a fisheries biologist will be the future for the upper eel basin. And I think there's a lot of hope in this. You see braided streams. It's obviously wintertime here. But we know from historic records that this area is thought to be one of the most important Chinook spawning habitats in the entire Eel River. Is it going to create 800,000 fish? Of course not. There's lots of work to do in the basin, but we do think it will have an important positive impact on those fish populations. And I think we're fortunate to have this opportunity, by really led by PG&E and their need to decommission this infrastructure. To get back in the headwaters and recreate some of this historic habitat. And hopefully, make sure we have these fish into the future. So I'm sure you have lots of questions. I put freetheeel.org up there. If you really want to dig into the details, we have an information portion of that site that has a ton of the studies that have been completed, including by the Two Basin Partnership, Congressman Huffman's ad hoc. Like if you want to go down the rabbit hole and in the weeds on any of this stuff, freetheeel.org is your place. And, that's a site I maintain, or have helped maintain, I should say. We really try to get all the latest and greatest information on there. So folks that, want to learn more can see those studies and see that engineering work and learn more. All right. So with that, I will kill the slide presentation. I reserve the right to pull it back up if there's questions that need it. And yeah, happy to take any questions y'all have.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Okay, I just wanted to remind everybody, one last reminder that if you would please put your questions in the chat, we'll start there. And we do have a few questions, so I'm going to fire away. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. So we have a question from Lori Mott. Who are the opponents of the effort and who are the allies? And where is Congressman Huffman on this?
Yeah, and I failed to mention that in my spiel. So the folks on the steering committee are, of course, us, Cal Trout, Trout Unlimited, Humboldt County, Round Valley Indian Tribes, Sonoma Water, and Mendocino Inland Water and Power Commission, which is a JPA of Mendocino County water agencies. I'll spare you naming them all. So that's the steering committee. I would say that, that effort really started with Congressman Huffman's ad hoc. And, so I don't have like a list of all our supporters, but I would say, I think there are a number of people that would support that effort on both sides. The goal is to try to meet as many interests as we can. Who are the opponents? I think that's a little tougher to say. I wouldn't call out any organization specifically, but there are certainly folks on the Russian River side that would love to see the dam stay. Who pays for that is an enormous question mark. Obviously, those of us that have looked at it in detail, it'd be really tough and really expensive to maintain this project as it's been maintained. And so this is, sort of the more reasonable approach, I think, to keep that water at a reasonable cost. Because again, that water has been coming to the Russian River Basin for free, sort of at the courtesy of PG&E. So if that water is needed for municipal needs, you can kind of charge more for it. If it's ag water, which much of it is used for, when that cost starts going up, it sort of breaks people's business models, right? And so if you've been getting an input to your business model for free, and all of a sudden you have to pay for it, right? It's going to change your profit outcome. So And then I'll just say on the eel side, there are certainly folks on the eel side, and even at the impetus of this project 100 years ago, Humboldt County opposed this project being built. Right, that water gets taken out of the eel and sent to the Russians, so the eel really gets all the costs of this project in terms of certainly the fishery, downstream water users, and the Russian side gets all the benefits. And there's still a lot of people that feel pretty upset by that situation. So there are certainly folks on the eel side that would be very happy if this diversion just ended and the dams came out.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to define a couple of acronyms.
Sure.
ESA, you were talking
Yeah,
about.
sorry. I policy and environmental stuff. You just live in acronyms. Endangered Species Act.
Okay, great. And ERPA, can you tell
Yeah.
us what that is? And
Yep. Eel Russian Project Authority is a joint powers authority formed by Sonoma Water, Sonoma County, and then Mendocino Inland Water and Power Commission, which again is a JPA of itself. And those are the entities that make up ERPA. Additionally, ERPA has a board seat for Round Valley Indian tribes. So 2 Mendocino board seats, 1 Sonoma County Supervisor board seat, 1 Sonoma Water board seat, which is a Sonoma Water Director, which is a Sonoma County Supervisor. So differently than Marin, Sonoma Water's Board of Directors are just the supervisors. So while technically 1 seat is Sonoma Water and 1 is Sonoma County, they're actually both supervisors. Wonky,
And
but
what does it mean, the round, sorry, forgot the name of it. The Round Valley
for Round
Indian
Valley to have
Tribe.
a board seat?
Yeah, to have a board seat, but not be part of the JPA.
Yeah, so tribes are sovereign nations, and I think there's concerns there that it's sort of like a different governance level, and also just sovereignty. Tribes are very loath to, as they should be, to give up their sovereignty for things like this. So yeah, but it is an interesting power dynamic because Round Valley doesn't really have much of a voting voice in in what happens there, but they do have this role on the board. So
Okay.
and I think I
Neither-
was maybe remiss in saying on that steering committee, Round Valley Indian Tribes is part of it, and has been a long time involved in this whole thing for a long time. So apologies,
Okay.
I missed that.
And then the last acronym is the FIRO. And I
Yeah,
was wondering if you can just describe how that technology has changed how storage is managed in the Lake Mendocino and Sonoma Lake.
yeah,
Lake
yeah.
Sonoma.
So FIRO's forecast informed reservoir operations. And as I always jokingly say, so get this, we look at the weather to decide how much water we keep in reservoirs. And that's really what it is. It's advanced weather forecasting that allows water managers, right, that need to maintain that flood pool for public safety, to really fudge that flood pool and store more water based on like long-term weather forecasts. And Sonoma Water has been a real leader in developing that technology. It's still, to my knowledge, it's still on like an interim basis on Lake Mendocino, but is likely a shoe-in to be permanent. It's being looked at other reservoirs across the state, and it's really a great tool to to store more water in these dual purpose dams that are both for storage and flood control, and really just make better use of those facilities. I don't know off the top of my head like how much extra water that allows in Lake Mendocino, but it's not insignificant. I want to say it's like 15 or 20,000 acre feet, which is, what, 25% of the storage or 15% of the storage. So the trick to that is it allows more water later into the spring. And so we're able to better capture those like February, March, April storms in Lake Mendocino than we were historically. So it effectively is like raising the dam at Lake Mendocino, right? It allows them to keep more water.
Thanks. So Tony Williams, the general manager of the North Marin Water District, says Lake Mendocino was the first dam in the country to use
Yep.
FIRO, which is amazing. And also in a previous chat, he put a link to the proposed future diversion by ERPA, alternative E2, in case folks want to look at that. I'm gonna go to some more questions, and then maybe Tony, if you want to come in at the end with the Q&A, that would be fine. I wanted to ask, Susan Stomp says, are there safety issues with the Scott Dam as a structure that helps justify its removal?
Yeah, I think maybe I touched on that after Susan put that question in, but absolutely yes. I'm going to take one step back and just note that those slides I had of the renderings are from that same presentation Tony put in the chat. So if you want to see more of those renderings, by all means, that's a great place to look, and you can see the other alternatives that we were looking at.
Okay, great.
Yeah, safety issues with Scott Dam, with September 11th, much of the information around dam safety is now hidden behind confidentiality because of really terrorism concerns. So publicly available information is scant. We have a number of advocates that would, across the state. I mean, I work on dam issues statewide, both how dams are controlled to protect natural resources, as well as decommissionings. And, none of us have a real good look at actual dam safety information. It's all kept private. And so we don't know what that information is. What we do know is that both FERC and the Division of Safety of Dams in California have concurred with PG&E that 10-foot or 25% reduction in storage volume was justified. And for the fisheries concern, it really does make things harder. It means there's less water to work with. There's less cold water to work with, right? So even from a endangered species fisheries perspective, it makes things tougher, right? Not easier. So I only say that to highlight dam safety kind of trumps all. And PG&E, we know is doing additional work around that seismic safety. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they get more bad news and have to reduce storage volume more, or if this thing goes on too long, if decommissioning takes too long. And I don't say this to fearmonger, like PG&E is going to protect their liability and protect public safety, which is a weird thing to say about PG&E, I think, for many of us. But I do think those concerns, at least as hydropower dams go, are taken very seriously, and they'll further reduce storage volume if there's a need. And we won't have any insight into that until there's like a FERC notice that says you got to do this.
And then there was a question about the tunnel, and the comment is it not inevitable that sooner or later a quake or land movement will cause the tunnel to fall? And then what? What then?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Infrastructure like this is fallible, right? We're seeing it with Scott Dam right now. It's 100 years old, right? It was built when people were driving Model Ts. The tunnel's made it 100 years. Will it make it 100 more? I mean, those are decisions about those future investments, right? Is this a good investment? Is this the right investment for water supply reliability in the short term, in the long term? Those are all questions that water managers need to grapple with. And I don't think we have a great answer for them. I think even now, right, we know that new diversion structure is going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million. No one really knows where that money is going to come from yet, and no one knows how that water is going to be monetized. So that business plan is still a work in progress, and at some point there'll have to be a gut check on if that's a good idea or not. To Tom's point, long term, right? Like you said, that tunnel fails, if any number of things could go wrong. And this is true of all large infrastructure, right? You're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket, and sometimes it's what we have to do to meet, our supply demands.
So just to be clear, the new diversion would still use the tunnel.
Correct.
The Redview tunnel. Okay.
Yep, would still use the old tunnel. And as far as I know, no work has been done to further assess the condition of that tunnel. It's being used currently, but there's any number of things. Perhaps it needs additional upgrades or, work to get it in good condition.
Okay, and then unless others have questions, I was just wondering, what are the challenges with restoring the river and the fish populations at this stage of their populations, but also who would do the restoration and the restoration activities, and how will that be funded?
Yeah, it's a great question. The eel is somewhat unique in that it doesn't have sort of a central management entity, and that can come, at least in terms of California, that can come in the way of in different forms. In Marin, right? MMWD does a lot of this work, related to fisheries and sort of mitigation for the water projects. In the Russian, Sonoma Water does, really just in the lower Russian though, kind of, the Army Corps, DWR, all these agencies and entities are often, have to mitigate for the externalities their project causes and basins. And that's not really true in the eel. PG&E has some responsibilities related to the project, but again, it's, the watershed's only 10% of the eel. It's a huge watershed. And so, like, for example, on the Middle Fork, PG&E has no responsibility. So that's one of the things we're trying to do with that eel plan that I mentioned. Part of that planning is creating a management entity that would start looking at the basin holistically and prioritizing not just restoration like aquatic restoration actions, but also like land acquisitions to meet 30 by 30 goals and habitat connectivity. So we're really trying to think big with this plan and build that structure, into the future so that this river, we can kind of tie together all the communities and interested people in this big basin. Who's going to pay for it's a great question. I mean, that's the $1 million question, but our hope, at least partially, is to kind of build on the momentum of dam removal as folks have done on the Klamath and develop interest for additional restoration dollars coming into the eel. And certainly, for the upper basin, that opportunity is already being sort of looked at. Our friends at Trout Unlimited have been looking at a large barrier removal above the dams, so kind of preparing for salmon to return, and have received at least some planning money to get that work done. So that's the kind of work we're thinking about. PG&E will be responsible for some level of restoration with their decommissioning of the project, but once you get outside the project boundary, yeah, we need to figure out ways to fund that work and to do that work. And I think our hope is to work with the community, Round Valley Indian tribes, Wiyot tribe in the lower river, and help build some momentum around this to help restore this river. And I'll be honest, like in the South Fork, we've got a lot of hope, right? We're starting to see both on the South Fork eel, Mendocino Coast, some of these places where we do have quite a bit of intact habitat, fish populations starting to do okay. The decline has kind of stopped. I think over a long enough turn now, we can kind of say that. And in some places, we've even seen recovery, Endangered Species Act recovery targets being met, which is awesome. So not all hope's lost, right? We're not still seeing these fish just head towards extinction everywhere, right? Are still places where they're doing okay, and the goal is to get those populations strong and robust so they'll, stray naturally and spread to other basins.
Well, I just really want to thank you for this evening's presentation and for sharing your time and your knowledge. Very informative. And the reason we thought this was important is because both the North Marin Water District and the Marin Municipal Water District are, undergoing some near-term planning and some longer-term planning for water supply, both for the near term, but also for the future. And as they evaluate different scenarios and different options, I think it's important. MCL is following issues like this because we want to understand the broader context and the impacts of the different options beyond the cost. So I really appreciate your coming this evening. So I just want to thank everyone for attending. If you enjoyed this presentation and would like to share it, It will be posted on our YouTube channel in a couple weeks. That's what I'm anticipating. And if you're interested in becoming a member of MCL, becoming involved in our work, or simply want to sign up for MCL's e-news about our committee meeting presentations, our programs and events, I encourage you to contact Martha at the office at mcl@marineconservationleague.org. And I wish you all a good night. That's the end. Thank you. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. See ya.